to a mecha. Are you absolutely sure you're reading that right? I squinted at the holographic document hovering above the sleek obsidian terminal. The alien text swirled and shifted, courtesy of the neural translator implanted behind my left ear. For the third time, yes, sighed Zelkarash, my late uncle's attorney. His 4 eyes blinked in asynchronous irritation, membranous eyelids sliding horizontally across iridescent purple irises. The final will and testament of Grakthar Zimvola, your maternal uncle by adoption and bond right, states explicitly that you, Eli Harper, are to inherit his Class 7 intergalactic cruiser, the Nebula Wanderer, on the condition that you and I, quote directly, transform this magnificent vessel into what humans refer to as a mecha, a bipedal combat-capable exoskeletal war machine of proportions sufficient to impress even the most jaded Vorathi war priest. I collapsed back into the hovering chair, which helpfully adjusted to my sudden weight redistribution. But that's insane. The Nebula Wanderer is a 240-foot luxury cruiser. It's worth more than the combined GDP of several small nations back on Earth. And he wants me to, what, cut it up and make a giant robot out of it? I believe that is the essential instruction, yes. Zelkarash's face tentacles twitched in what I'd come to recognize as the Zarelian equivalent of a shrug. Your uncle was always eccentric, by the standards of both his species and yours. That was the understatement of the millennium. Uncle Grak had scandalized both human and Zarelian society when he'd adopted my mother after rescuing her research vessel from a rogue comet 30 years ago. He'd further appalled everyone by insisting on learning human customs and integrating them with his own cultural practices. The result was a bizarre mishmash that made absolutely no sense to anyone but made Uncle Grak deliriously happy. There must be some kind of loophole, I muttered, running my hands through my hair. This ship is literally the only thing of value I have left. I can't just destroy it. The terms are quite clear, Zelkarash replied with the particular tone legal professionals across the galaxy seem to perfect. You must begin the conversion within 30 Earth days and complete it within 1 Earth year. Failure to comply will result in the Nebula Wanderer being donated to the Galactic Performance Art Collective, who will, according to your uncle's specific instructions, fill it with expired dairy products from 17 worlds and launch it into the heart of the Crab Nebula as a statement on the ephemeral nature of wealth. I groaned. That sounds exactly like something he would do. Indeed, Grakthar was nothing if not creative with his threats. The attorney's face tentacles rippled in what might have been amusement. I should note that the will does provide a generous stipend for the conversion process. Approximately 20 million galactic credits. My jaw dropped. 20 million? That's approximately equal to 437 million Earth dollars at current exchange rates. Zelkarash supplied helpfully. I whistled. Uncle Grak had always been loaded, but this was absurd. And all I have to do is turn his fancy space yacht into a giant fighting robot? That is correct. Though I should mention the will specifically indicates this mecha should be fully functional, capable of bipedal locomotion, and armed with, at minimum, what the document describes as the kind of weapons that make onlookers involuntarily void their waste extraction orifices in awe. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The sheer absurdity of the situation hit me all at once. Here I was, a 28-year-old mechanical engineer whose career had stalled after a disastrous attempt to revolutionize Earth's nascent gravity manipulation technology had ended with a laboratory explosion and 3 years of litigation. I was broke, disgraced, and had been seriously considering a career change to professional dog walker when the news of Uncle Grak's passing had reached me, and now I was the owner of an intergalactic luxury cruiser, provided I turned it into a giant robot. Did he leave any explanation? Any reason why he wanted this done? I asked once I'd gotten my laughter under control. Zelkarash's upper set of eyes narrowed slightly. The will contains a sealed message for you, to be viewed privately after you've accepted the inheritance terms. Oh, well, I guess I accept. It's not like I have better options. The attorney made a series of gestures over his datapad, and a small crystalline cube materialized on the desk between us. This contains your uncle's personal message. The ship's ownership has now officially transferred to you, and the conversion stipend will be deposited into your accounts within 1 standard rotation. I picked up the cube, turning it over in my hands. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse slightly with an inner light. What happens if I start the conversion but don't finish within the year? I asked, suddenly worried about the logistics of such an insane project. The will is quite specific on this point as well, Zelkarash said, consulting his datapad. Progress will be evaluated by a committee consisting of a Zarelian shipwright, a human mechanical engineer specializing in robotics, and... He paused, his face tentacles twitching in what appeared to be confusion. A Blorgian entertainment critic. A what? A Blorgian entertainment critic. They are known for their appreciation of the dramatic and absurd in performance arts. Of course, because this whole situation wasn't ridiculous enough already. If the committee determines you have made a good faith effort but technical challenges have prevented completion, they may grant an extension of up to 6 Earth months, Zelkarash continued. However, if they determine you have not made sufficient progress due to lack of effort or commitment, the ship will immediately revert to the alternate beneficiary. The dairy product space artists, I muttered. Precisely. I pocketed the crystal cube and stood up. Well, I guess I'd better go see my new ship then. And start figuring out how the hell I'm supposed to turn it into a giant robot. Zelkarash rose as well, his 7-foot frame unfolding elegantly. The Nebula Wanderer is currently docked at Bay 47 of the Orbital Customs Facility. All necessary clearances have been processed. He extended a slender 6-fingered hand. I wish you luck, Eli Harper. Your uncle spoke of you often and with great fondness. He believed you would appreciate his final request. I shook the attorney's hand, trying not to focus on the strange texture of his skin, somewhere between silk and very fine sandpaper. Thanks. I think I'm going to need all the luck I can get. The Nebula Wanderer was even more impressive than I remembered from my last visit, 5 years earlier. The ship gleamed like a polished obsidian sculpture against the sterile backdrop of the docking bay, its sleek lines and elegant curves a testament to Zarelian aesthetic sensibilities. It was roughly cylindrical in its overall shape, but with organic flowing elements that made it look almost alive, like a massive sea creature adapted for the void of space rather than ocean depths. As I approached, a portion of the hull shimmered and dissolved, forming a doorway. Uncle Grack had always hated traditional doors, calling them primitive segregations of space, unworthy of an advanced civilization. "Welcome, Eli Harper," chimed a melodious voice as I stepped inside. "I am Arya, the autonomous residential intelligence assistant assigned to the Nebula Wanderer. Facial and genetic recognition confirms your identity as the new owner. All systems are at your disposal." The interior was just as I remembered, a bizarre but somehow harmonious blend of alien luxury and human practicality. The main living area featured both hovering Zarelian meditation platforms and a massive Earth-style sectional sofa. The kitchen contained devices I couldn't begin to name alongside a vintage 2050s coffee maker. "Thanks, Arya," I said, looking around. "Can you show me to the bridge? Or control room? Whatever you call it." "Of course. Please follow the illuminated path." A subtle blue glow appeared on the floor, leading away from the living area. I followed it through corridors lined with what appeared to be genuine artwork from at least a dozen different worlds, including several pieces I recognized from Earth, an original Monet, a Banksy, and what looked suspiciously like one of the missing Fabergé eggs. The bridge was a spacious, dome-like room with a 360-degree view of the docking bay, courtesy of some technology that effectively made the hull transparent from the inside. A single throne-like chair sat in the center, surrounded by floating holographic displays. "Uncle Grack never did anything halfway, did he?" I murmured. "Grack Thar Zimvola was known for his commitment to what he called living with exuberant totality," Arya replied. "Would you like to review the ship's specifications?" "Yes, please. And, Arya, are you aware of the conditions of my inheritance?" There was a brief pause before the AI responded. "I am aware that Grakthar's will contains certain stipulations regarding the future configuration of this vessel. The specifics have not been shared with me." I sank into the command chair, which adjusted itself perfectly to my body. "He wants me to turn the ship into a giant fighting robot. A mecha." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. That is, unexpected." "Yeah, tell me about it." I pulled the crystal cube from my pocket. He left me a message explaining why. I hope. "The privacy cube contains a holographic message keyed to your neural patterns," Arya informed me. "Simply hold it in your hand and think about activating it." I did as instructed, focusing my thoughts on the cube. It warmed in my palm, then projected a life-sized hologram of Uncle Grack into the air before me. He looked just as I remembered him, 7 feet tall with mottled blue-gray skin, 4 arms, and the elaborate head crest that marked him as a member of Zarelian high society. He was wearing what he'd always called his human casual outfit, a Hawaiian shirt stretched over his broad torso, khaki shorts, and a fishing hat covered in colorful lures. "Eli, my favorite nephew," the hologram boomed, spreading all four arms wide as if for a hug. "If you're seeing this, then I've shed my physical form and moved on to whatever comes next. And you've just been told about your inheritance. I imagine you're quite confused." He laughed, a rumbling sound that always reminded me of distant thunder. "First, let me say how proud I am of you. Your experiment with gravity manipulation was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The fact that it exploded was merely an unexpected bonus. Explosions are the universe's way of applauding particularly creative thinking." I couldn't help but smile. That was so typically Uncle Grack, finding the positive spin on what had been the most humiliating disaster of my life. "Now, about the ship," he continued, his four eyes twinkling with mischief. "I want you to turn it into what your Earth entertainment calls a mecha, for three important reasons." He held up one finger on his upper right hand. "First, because it will be awesome." A second finger joined the first. "Second, because you need a project to rebuild your confidence and remind yourself of your exceptional talent." A third finger rose. "And third, because the galaxy is about to need it." My smile faded. "What?" The hologram continued as if it had heard me, though I knew it was just a recording. "You see, dear nephew, I recently discovered something troubling during my explorations of the Capella sector. There's an ancient weapon platform there, built by a long-vanished civilization called the Precursors. According to the data I recovered, this platform activates every 3,000 years to conduct what its programming calls a civilization fitness assessment." Uncle Grack's expression grew more serious. "The last assessment period is due to begin approximately 14 Earth months from the recording of this message. The platform will generate a series of combat drones of increasing sophistication and send them to test the dominant civilizations in this sector of the galaxy. If these civilizations can defeat the drones, they are deemed fit and left alone for another cycle. If not," he drew one finger across his throat in a very human gesture. "Now, I considered warning the Galactic Council, but those bureaucratic tentacle tanglers would spend 5 years debating the proper response protocol, and the various military forces would just throw conventional warships at the problem, which the historical records suggest is ineffective against these drones." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "The records indicate that in previous cycles, the most effective countermeasure was precisely the type of vessel I'm asking you to create. A highly maneuverable, humanoid-configured combat platform with adaptable tactical systems and a single intuitive control interface. In other words, a mecha." I stared at the hologram, trying to process what I was hearing. Was this real, or was Uncle Grack playing one last elaborate prank? "I know what you're thinking," the hologram said with a wink. "Is old Grack off his tentacles again? But I've left all my research data in the ship's computer. Arya can show you everything I found. The threat is real, Eli." He straightened up, his expression softening. "But even if I'm wrong, which I'm not, you'll still have created something magnificent. Something that combines the best of Zorelian and human innovation. Something that will make people's eye analogs pop out of their face regions in astonishment." The hologram spread all four arms again. "So, get to work, nephew. Turn my beautiful ship into an even more beautiful giant robot. I've arranged for all the resources you'll need. And remember," his voice dropped to what he probably thought was a whisper, but was more like a normal human speaking volume, "the weapon systems in the aft storage bay are completely unregistered and officially don't exist. The Galactic Customs Authority gets very touchy about private citizens owning molecular disruptors." With a final wink, the hologram disappeared, leaving me alone in the bridge with my thoughts. "Arya," I said after a long moment, "please access Uncle Grack's research on this precursor weapon platform." "Accessing," the AI replied. "Data package found." "It is extensive, and appears to be authentic, based on cross-reference with known historical records." So he wasn't making it up? There really is some ancient alien weapon about to wake up and start attacking people? The evidence supports Grakthar's claims, yes. The precursor civilization is well documented, though little is known about their technology. Most of their artifacts were thought to have been destroyed or rendered inert millennia ago. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming on. And the part about mechas being the best defense? The historical records are fragmented, but they do suggest that during the last activation cycle, approximately 3,000 Earth years ago, The most effective countermeasures were indeed single-pilot vehicles with articulated, anthropomorphic configurations. Why would that be more effective than a normal spaceship? I wondered aloud. Unknown. However, Grakthar's notes suggest it may relate to the precursor drone's targeting algorithms. They appear designed to counter conventional space vessels but have difficulty adapting to the less predictable movement patterns of biomimetic craft. I leaned back in the command chair, staring up at the transparent dome above me. The docking bay lights reflected off the sleek curves of other vessels nearby, all of them conventional spacecraft, nothing remotely resembling the giant humanoid war machine my uncle wanted me to build. So, to summarize, I said, my eccentric alien uncle has left me his luxury spaceship on the condition that I turn it into a giant fighting robot, because an ancient alien weapons platform is about to wake up and start attacking galactic civilization, and apparently, giant robots are the best defense against it. That appears to be an accurate summary, yes. I started laughing again. Not the shocked laughter from earlier, but a genuine full-bodied laugh born of the absolute absurdity of my situation. When I finally got myself under control, I wiped tears from my eyes and stood up. Well, Arya, looks like we've got work to do. First things first, I need to see the complete schematics of the ship. Then I need to understand exactly what systems we can modify and what we need to preserve. Then I need to figure out how to make a 240-foot luxury cruiser walk around on two legs without falling over. I can provide all technical specifications immediately, Arya said. However, I feel compelled to note that this undertaking represents an engineering challenge of unprecedented complexity. I grinned. I know. Isn't it great? The next few days passed in a blur of technical schematics, material stress analyses, and increasingly bizarre design iterations. I moved into the ship, my ship now, I supposed, and turned the main lounge into an impromptu workshop, with holographic models floating in the air and component diagrams plastered across every surface. Arya proved to be an invaluable assistant, not just providing technical data, but offering insights and suggestions that showed a level of creativity I hadn't expected from an AI, even one as advanced as she clearly was. The main propulsion system could be repurposed for the mecha's primary locomotion, she suggested on the third day, as I stared bleary-eyed at a holographic model of the ship's engine core. The gravitic impellers could be reconfigured to function as artificial muscles, providing both strength and dexterity. That could actually work, I muttered, manipulating the hologram to explore the idea. We'd need to distribute them throughout the frame, though, and we'd need a completely new control system. The ship's neural interface could be adapted for that purpose, Arya pointed out. It already processes complex three-dimensional movement commands. I nodded, making notes on my datapad. What about power distribution? These systems were never designed to function as limbs. They'll draw energy differently, create heat differently. I've been analyzing that issue, Arya said, bringing up a new hologram showing a complex network of energy pathways. If we reconfigure the secondary power relays and add additional cooling systems here, and here, we should be able to maintain optimal operating temperatures even under high-stress conditions. I peered at the diagram. That's actually brilliant. You're pretty good at this for a ship's AI. Thank you, Arya replied, and I could have sworn I detected a note of pride in her synthesized voice. Grakthar encouraged me to develop problem-solving capabilities beyond my original programming. Parameters. He found it amusing when I suggested improvements to his environments. That sounds like Uncle Grak, I said with a smile. He never did like being told there was a right way to do things. By the end of the first week, I had a preliminary design for the conversion. It was ambitious, probably impossible, and absolutely insane. It was also the most exciting engineering challenge I'd ever faced. The basic concept was to reconfigure the ship's main hull into a torso, with the fore section becoming the head and upper body, and the aft section splitting to form the legs. The living quarters would remain largely intact within the torso, while the engine room would be distributed throughout the frame to power the limbs. The ship's existing defensive systems, which were considerably more extensive than would be legal for a civilian vessel, another classic Uncle Grak touch, would be repositioned to serve as the mecha's weapons. These included energy projectors that could be mounted in the palms, a particle accelerator that would make a devastating chest-mounted cannon, and those mysterious molecular disruptors Uncle Grak had mentioned, which I still hadn't located. The real challenge was the structural integrity. Spaceships aren't designed to stand upright or walk around. They're built to handle the pressures of space travel and atmospheric entry, not to support their own weight in a gravity well, or deal with the complex stresses of bipedal locomotion. We're going to need to completely reinforce the internal frame, I told Arya, studying the stress analysis simulations she'd run. And we'll probably need to source some exotic materials that can handle the strain. I have accessed Grakthar's resource network, Arya informed me. He maintained connections with suppliers of numerous restricted materials. Many of them still owe him favors. I raised an eyebrow. What exactly did Uncle Grak do for a living? I always thought he was just a rich eccentric who went on adventures. Grakthar's official occupation was listed as Cultural Enrichment Consultant, Arya said. However, his actual activities were diverse. They included archaeology, treasure hunting, diplomatic intervention, technological acquisition, and occasional participation in what he termed justified redistribution of problematically hoarded resources. So he was a grave robber, treasure hunter, negotiator, tech thief, and Robin Hood? Those terms would not be inaccurate, though he preferred his own descriptors. I shook my head, grinning. No wonder he left me this insane project. He probably thought it was perfectly normal. Grakthar did frequently express the opinion that normal was a concept invented by beings with insufficient imagination. Arya agreed. As I was about to respond, a notification chimed. Incoming communication from Orbital Control, Arya announced. They are requesting permission to send a shuttle with the evaluation committee members for an initial assessment of your progress. I froze. Already? It's only been a week. The will specified weekly progress evaluations beginning immediately upon acceptance of the inheritance, Arya reminded me. Right. Of course it did. I sighed, running a hand through my unwashed hair. I hadn't slept more than a few hours at a stretch since arriving on the ship. Tell them permission granted, and maybe clean up in here a bit if you can. I will activate the environmental maintenance systems, Arya assured me. The committee's shuttle will dock in approximately 45 minutes. Just enough time for a quick shower and change of clothes then. I hurried to the suite I'd claimed as my quarters, Uncle Grak's old room, which had thankfully been modified to accommodate human physiology as well as Zorelian. 45 minutes later, freshly cleaned and dressed in what I hoped was appropriately professional attire, I stood in the docking bay as the committee's shuttle connected with the Nebula Wanderer. The first to emerge was clearly the Zorelian shipwright, a tall, slender figure with the same general body plan as Uncle Grak, but with a more subdued head crest and skin that tended toward green rather than blue. He wore what appeared to be a highly formal uniform covered in intricate insignia. Next came the human mechanical engineer, a short, stocky woman with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of deeply tanned, weathered skin that suggested she spent a lot of time working in varied environments rather than behind a desk. She wore practical coveralls covered in tool pouches and had a cybernetic right arm that looked to be heavily customized. The final committee member was, well, I wasn't entirely sure what the Blorgian looked like, because they were wearing what appeared to be a full-body environmental suit made of shifting, iridescent material that constantly changed colors and textures. The only visible feature was a cluster of what might have been sensory organs at roughly the height where a human's head would be. Welcome aboard the Nebula Wanderer, I greeted them, trying to project confidence I definitely didn't feel. I'm Eli Harper, the new owner. The Zorelian stepped forward first, making a formal gesture with his three-fingered hands. I am Shipwright First Class Zelmaran of the Zorelian Vessel Design Guild. I am here to evaluate the structural and aerospace aspects of your project. His tone made it clear exactly what he thought of the idea of turning a luxury cruiser into a giant robot. The human woman stepped up next, offering a handshake with her cybernetic arm. The grip was precisely calibrated, firm but not crushing. Dr. Kira Yoshida, specialist in humanoid robotics and exosystem integration. I've worked on everything from mining exoskeletons to deep space exploration suits. She grinned, revealing a gold tooth. This might be the craziest project I've ever been invited to evaluate, though. I'm looking forward to it. The Blorgian made a sound like water being gargled through a metal straw, which my translator rendered as, I am known as the one who appreciates dramatic tension in narrative structures, but you may call me Critic Zix. I am here to ensure that your creation possesses appropriate aesthetic impact and narrative resonance. Nice to meet you all, I said, trying not to stare at the constantly shifting surface of the Blorgian's suit. I've only been working on the design for a week, but I'd be happy to show you what I've come up with so far. I led them to the main lounge, where my chaotic workshop was now somewhat less chaotic thanks to Arya's cleanup efforts. The holographic models still floated in the air, showing my preliminary design for the mecha conversion. As you can see, my basic approach is to maintain the ship's essential systems while reconfiguring the hull structure to allow for bipedal locomotion and manipulator limbs, I explained, manipulating the hologram to show the various stages of the planned conversion. The biggest challenge is the structural integrity, ensuring the frame can support itself under gravity and handle the stress of movement. Shipwright Zelmaran circled the hologram, his 4 eyes narrowed critically. The proposed alterations would completely compromise the vessel's spaceworthiness. The distribution of mass alone would make stable flight impossible without constant thruster adjustments. That's why I'm planning to integrate a distributed propulsion system throughout the frame, I countered, highlighting the relevant components in the hologram. The existing gravitic impellers will be repurposed as a combination of support structure and movement system. They'll essentially create a partial anti-gravity field within the mecha's body, reducing the effective weight while still allowing for kinesthetic feedback during movement. Dr. Yoshida leaned in, her cybernetic eye whirring as it zoomed in on the details. Clever approach. You're using the ship's own systems to cheat the square cube law. But what about reaction time? There's always a lag in converting pilot input to mechanical output, especially in large systems. I grinned, warming to the technical discussion. That's where the neural interface comes in. The Nebula Wanderer already has an advanced AI system, ARIA, who can process and optimize control inputs in real time. Combined with the ship's existing neural interface, we can create a system that responds almost as quickly as a human body. I'm present and fully integrated with all ship systems, Arya chimed in. My processing capabilities exceed standard vessel AI parameters by approximately 327%. Dr. Yoshida raised an eyebrow. An AI co-pilot? Interesting approach. Critic Zix had been silent until now, their environment suit shifting through a series of deep blues and purples. Now they spoke, the translator rendering their gurgling speech. The aesthetic concept lacks sufficient dramatic impact. Where is the unique visual identity? The symbolic resonance? A true mecha must inspire awe and represent a cohesive artistic statement. I blinked, not entirely sure how to respond to that. I've been focused more on the engineering challenges than the aesthetics so far. A critical oversight. Zix's suit flashed a bright red. The visual and symbolic aspects are integral to the mecha's purpose. A weapon that does not inspire fear in its enemies and courage in its allies is merely a tool, not a symbol of civilization's defiance against extinction. Dr. Yoshida snorted. It needs to work before it can look pretty. Function and form are inseparable in truly transcendent design, Zix countered. The greatest mechas in human entertainment media understood this fundamental truth. I held up my hands. I'll definitely consider the aesthetic aspects more carefully as the design develops. But for now, I'd appreciate your technical feedback on the feasibility of my approach. The discussion continued for several hours, with Shipwright Zelmaran pointing out numerous structural issues I'd need to address. Dr. Yoshida offering practical suggestions for the control systems and artificial musculature, and Critic Zix continuing to insist that I needed to incorporate more narrative resonance and symbolic duality into the design. By the end, I was exhausted but also energized. Despite their different perspectives and Zix's obsession with aesthetics, all 3 committee members seemed to agree that my basic approach was sound, if ambitious. You have made a promising start, Zelmaran concluded formally. Though I maintain significant reservations about the fundamental concept, your technical approach demonstrates a sound understanding of the challenges involved. I've seen crazier ideas work, Dr. Yoshida added with a grin. You've got the right instincts for this kind of integration. Keep focused on the control systems. That's where most giant robot projects fail. Critic Zix's suit had settled into a contemplative swirl of green and gold. I shall withhold final judgment until I see more attention paid to the symbolic and aesthetic dimensions. However, I acknowledge the need to establish technical foundations before artistic expression can fully manifest. They left shortly afterward, promising to return in 1 week for the next evaluation. As the shuttle departed, I collapsed onto one of the lounge's hovering cushions. Well, that went better than expected, I told Arya. They didn't laugh me out of the room, at least. Their combined expertise will be valuable as the project progresses, Arya agreed. I have recorded all their suggestions and incorporated them into our design database. I yawned, suddenly realizing how tired I was. Great. Let's review them tomorrow. I think I need to sleep for about 12 hours. Your biological functions do appear to be operating at reduced efficiency, Arya noted. Rest is recommended. I will continue refining the structural models based on shipwright Zelmaran's feedback while you sleep. I hauled myself to my feet and shuffled toward my quarters. Thanks, Arya. Wake me if anything explodes. That seems unlikely at this stage of the project, but I will monitor all systems and alert you to any anomalies. As I collapsed into bed, I couldn't help but smile. 1 week ago, I'd been a disgraced engineer contemplating a career walking dogs. Now I was the owner of a luxury spaceship that I was planning to turn into a giant robot to save the galaxy from an ancient alien threat. Uncle Grack would definitely approve. The months that followed were a blur of frantic activity, technical breakthroughs, catastrophic setbacks, and gradual, hard-won progress. The weekly committee visits became a regular rhythm in our work, with each member focusing on their area of expertise, while also inevitably commenting on the others. Shipwright Zelmaran's initial skepticism slowly gave way to reluctant admiration as he witnessed our solutions to the structural challenges. Dr. Yoshida became an enthusiastic collaborator, often staying after the official evaluations to help troubleshoot particularly tricky problems with the control systems. And Critic Zix, despite their bizarre insistence on narrative coherence in an engineering project, actually provided some surprisingly useful insights into the psychological impact of different design elements. The ship itself was gradually transformed. We began with the internal structures, reinforcing the frame and redistributing the primary systems to accommodate the planned configuration. Next came the propulsion modifications, converting the main engines into what would become the mecha's power core and repurposing the secondary thrusters for limb movement. The most challenging phase was the actual reconfiguration of the hull. This required a complete dock at a specialized facility, which we found in a somewhat questionable shipyard on the fringes of the Arturo system. The proprietor, a 6-armed insectoid named Chick Tick, asked no questions and had equipment capable of handling the massive structural changes we needed to make. Never thought I'd see a Zorelian luxury cruiser getting turned into a war machine, Chick Tack commented, as we oversaw the initial cutting of the hull. Usually it's the other way around, warships getting converted to pleasure craft after they're decommissioned. This is a special case, I told him, wincing slightly as a plasma cutter sliced through the ship's beautiful outer skin. Always is, Chitkatik chittered, mandibles clicking in what I assumed was amusement. Don't worry. We'll preserve as much of the original finish as possible. That iridescent nano-coating alone is worth more than some small moons. The work at Chitkatik's yard took nearly 3 months, during which time I lived in a small habitat module attached to the facility. Arya's consciousness was temporarily transferred to a portable unit that stayed with me, allowing us to continue refining the control systems while the physical work progressed. I've been analyzing the historical records of the previous precursor assessment cycles, Arya told me one evening as I was working on the neural interface coding. There's a consistent pattern to the deployment of the test drones. I looked up from my work. What kind of pattern? They begin with relatively simple units, comparable to current mid-level military drones. Each wave that follows increases in complexity and capability. The final wave typically consists of a single, extremely powerful unit that the records describe as a civilization extinction threat. I felt a chill run down my spine. And we're building just one mecha to deal with all of that? According to the historical records, a single highly adaptable combat platform with the right pilot can be effective, Arya said. The key appears to be unpredictability and tactical flexibility. Conventional military forces tend to follow established doctrine, which the precursor drones quickly adapt to. A single pilot making intuitive decisions can apparently confound their tactical algorithms. So basically, we're betting the galaxy on the hope that these ancient killer robots can't handle improvisation, I said with a weak laugh. Great. The historical success rate for this approach is approximately 73%, Arya offered helpfully. And the other 27%? Total civilization collapse within that sector of the galaxy. I rubbed my temples. No pressure then. By the 6-month mark, the ship had been completely transformed. The sleek, elegant cruiser was gone, replaced by a hulking humanoid figure that stood nearly 250 feet tall. The head contained the bridge, now reconfigured as a cockpit with a 360-degree view provided by the same hull transparency technology that had originally allowed panoramic views from inside the ship. The torso housed the main living quarters and engineering sections, while the limbs contained the repurposed propulsion systems and newly configured weapon emplacements. It was, objectively speaking, ridiculous. It was also, I had to admit, absolutely magnificent. Structurally sound, aesthetically balanced, and narratively resonant, declared Critic Zix during one evaluation. their environment suits swirling with patterns of gold and silver that I'd come to recognize as extreme approval. A perfect fusion of function and symbolic meaning. The asymmetric shoulder armor evokes both protection and aggression, while the sleek leg configuration suggests speed without sacrificing stability. Dr. Yoshida was more practical in her assessment. The distributed motor system works better than I expected. The reaction time is nearly instantaneous, and the force feedback through the neural interface gives excellent kinesthetic awareness. You could probably do ballet in this thing if you wanted to. Even shipwright Zelmaran had grudgingly conceded that our creation was a remarkably effective adaptation of a vessel never intended for such a configuration. But for all our progress, we were still facing significant challenges. The neural interface worked perfectly in simulations, but caused severe feedback loops when tested with an actual pilot, me, resulting in everything from debilitating nausea to brief hallucinatory episodes. The weapons systems were integrated but not yet fully calibrated, meaning test fires tended to be either pathetically weak or catastrophically powerful with little middle ground. And then there was the matter of the mysterious, molecular disruptors Uncle Grack had mentioned. Despite an exhaustive search of the ship's systems and storage areas, we had found no trace of these supposedly powerful weapons. Perhaps Grack Thar was referring to a planned acquisition rather than existing equipment, Arya suggested after yet another fruitless search. Or maybe he was just messing with me, I sighed, leaning back in the cockpit chair. We were running a calibration sequence on the mecha's right arm, making minute adjustments to the response sensitivity. One last joke from beyond the grave. That would be consistent with his personality profile, Arya agreed. However, all other aspects of his final message have proven accurate. Before I could respond, an alert flashed across the main display. Incoming transmission from the Galactic Council, Arya announced. Priority level, urgent. The Council? I frowned. Why would they be contacting us? Put it through. The display shifted to show a severe-looking Tellurian with the distinctive ridged forehead of their species. Their multiple eyes blinked in sequence as they took in my appearance. This is Senior Counselor Vexcor of the Galactic Security Committee, they announced without preamble. Am I addressing Eli Harper, current owner of the vessel formerly known as the Nebula Wanderer? That's me, I confirmed, suddenly nervous. Had someone reported our project? Were we violating some obscure regulation? What can I do for you, Counselor? We have detected anomalous energy signatures in the Capella sector, Vexcor stated, their tone grave. Our analysis suggests they match patterns associated with precursor technology. Since your late uncle, Grakthar Zimvola, filed a report regarding potential precursor artifacts in that region shortly before his death, we are contacting all individuals connected to his research. I exchanged a glance with Arya's nearest sensor cluster. What kind of anomalous energy signatures? Power buildup consistent with large-scale automated systems coming online after extended dormancy. Our scientists estimate full activation within approximately 30 Earth days. My stomach dropped. 30 days? But that's earlier than expected, yes, Arya interjected smoothly. According to Grakthar's research, the activation cycle wasn't due for at least another 2 months. Vexcor's eyes narrowed. You appear to have specific knowledge about this phenomenon. I must request that you share all information immediately. The Council is assembling a task force to investigate. I hesitated, my mind racing. Uncle Grack had specifically avoided contacting the Council because he believed they would respond ineffectively. But now they were involved anyway, and earlier than we'd planned for. We do have information, I said carefully. My uncle discovered evidence of an automated precursor weapons platform in the Capella sector. According to his research, it activates every 3,000 years to conduct what it calls a civilization fitness assessment. Basically sending out combat drones to test the military capabilities of whatever civilizations are around. If they pass, they're left alone for another cycle. If they fail, well, extinction is on the table. Vexcor's expression remained impassive, but I noticed a subtle change in the color of their skin, darkening in a way that, if they were human, I would interpret as paling with shock. And your uncle chose not to bring this information to the Council immediately because he believed a conventional military response would be ineffective, I explained. The historical records he found suggested that these precursor drones adapt quickly to standard tactics. The most effective countermeasure in previous cycles was a specific type of combat platform, which is what we've been building. I gestured to the cockpit around me. You're suggesting that a single vessel, operated by one human with no military training, will be more effective than the combined forces of the Galactic Council? Vexcor's tone made it clear exactly what they thought of that idea. I'm suggesting that diversity of approach might be valuable, I countered. By all means, send your fleet. But maybe consider that my uncle might have known what he was talking about. He wasn't exactly an amateur when it came to precursor technology. Vexcor was silent for a moment, their multiple eyes blinking in that sequential pattern that I'd learned indicated deep thought in their species. We will require all of Grak-Thar's research data immediately, they said finally, and I am ordering your vessel to rendezvous with the Council Task Force at the following coordinates. A string of navigation data appeared on a secondary display. We'll transmit the research data, I agreed. As for joining your task force, with all due respect, Counselor, we're still completing our final systems integration. We'll be more effective if we finish our work before engaging. This is not a request, Mr. Harper. It is a direct order from the Galactic Security Committee. All capable vessels are being conscripted under Emergency Protocol 17B. I bit back the response I wanted to give. Antagonizing the Council wouldn't help. Captain Eliza Hayes stared at the holographic projection of Admiral Kohler, not bothering to hide her incredulity. Sir, with all due respect, that's the stupidest fucking idea I've heard since the Regellians tried to weaponize their own flatulence. The Admiral's projection flickered slightly as he sighed. I'm not asking you to like it, Hayes. I'm ordering you to do it. Deploy a platoon of geriatric veterans against the most technologically advanced hostile species we've ever encountered? Eliza pinched the bridge of her nose. Why don't we just surrender now and save everyone the trouble? Because, the Admiral's voice hardened, the Vexari have specifically demanded to face our most experienced warriors in ritual combat. They consider it an honor. If we refuse, they'll just glass the entire colony from orbit. And sending septuagenarians with artificial hips is our brilliant solution? Jesus Christ. These aren't just any old folks, Captain. They're the Void Walkers. Eliza's mouth fell open. The Void Walkers. But they're a myth. I assure you they are very real and very much alive. Mostly. In the recreation hall of the Golden Years veteran residential facility on Mars, 8 elderly humans sat around a table playing what appeared to be a card game. To the casual observer, they looked like any group of retirement home residents, gray-haired, wrinkled, and moving with the cautious deliberation of those whose bones had become brittle treasures. I raise you 2 protein supplements, said Nikolai Volkov, a massive Russian with a beard that had once been flaming red but was now mostly white. Despite being 79, his hands were still the size of dinner plates, though they trembled slightly as he pushed his betting chips forward. Fold, muttered Jiang Guowu, a thin Chinese man with spectacles and liver spots. My cards are as disappointing as my son's career choices. Speaking of disappointment, drawled Olivia Fleming, her British accent still crisp after all these years. Did anyone see that documentary about the Arcturian peace treaty? Complete rubbish. Made it sound like we just showed up and they handed us the keys to their antimatter refineries. History is written by the victors with the best publicists, replied Dio Adebayo, his Nigerian accent still thick despite 60 years of living. Off Earth, he tapped his temple with a finger that had been replaced with a slightly outdated prosthetic. And none of us ever hired publicists. The door to the recreation hall hissed open, interrupting their game. A young woman in a crisp fleet uniform stepped in, her posture rigid. At ease, Captain, before you sprain something, called Zoe Nakamura, an 82-year-old Japanese-American woman whose small frame belied the fact that she had once commanded the most feared special operations unit in Earth's history. Captain Hayes blinked in surprise. How did you know my rank? The same way I know you had coffee and synthetic eggs for breakfast, and you're worried about the mole on your back that you haven't had time to get checked, Zoe replied casually. I observe. Eliza's hand unconsciously reached toward her back before she caught herself. I'm looking for the Void Walkers? 8 pairs of ancient eyes turned to her, suddenly sharp as laser scalpels. Well, shit, muttered Kurt Schmidt, a German whose face was a roadmap of scars. They've finally remembered we exist. That can't be good. The Vexari High Command ship hovered in orbit above Nexus 7, a human colony world on the edge of what was now disputed space. The ship itself resembled a massive crystalline spider, its translucent limbs occasionally pulsing with colors that had no names in human languages. Supreme War Strategist Skal Ven stood in the observation dome, all 4 of his secondary eyes focused on the blue-green planet below while his primary eye examined tactical data streams. The humans have accepted our challenge, reported his subordinate, sub-strategist Mev Kin. They will send their legendary warriors to the designated battlefield at the appointed time. Skalven's breathing slits flared in anticipation. Excellent. Our ancestors have waited 3 generations for this opportunity. The humans have been an anomaly in our conquest calculations. A species that should have been easily subjugated, yet has somehow managed to expand their territory into 16 star systems. Their tactics are unpredictable, Mevkin noted cautiously. Unpredictability is merely a lack of sufficient data, Skalven replied. Once we defeat their greatest warriors in ritual combat, we will have the right to claim their military knowledge. Then their unpredictability will become our asset. And if they refuse to honor the ritual? Skalven's outer membrane rippled in the vexary equivalent of a dismissive shrug. Then we will do what we have done to 17 other species before them. We will eliminate their presence from this sector entirely. This is the dumbest thing I've done since I agreed to marry my 3rd wife, grumbled Kurt as the transport shuttle descended toward Nexus 7. And she tried to poison me. Twice. You should be flattered, said Olivia, who was carefully checking an ancient but well-maintained pulse rifle. It's not every day you're invited to participate in an alien ritual that will determine the fate of a human colony. I'd rather be invited to an all-you-can-eat buffet, said Nikolai. My great-granddaughter promised to take me to one next month for my birthday. If we survive this, Dio reminded him, which, given the information we've been provided, seems unlikely. Zoe, who had been silent during most of the journey, finally spoke. Captain Hayes, what precisely do we know about these Vexari and their combat rituals? Eliza, who had been ordered to accompany the veterans, looked up from her datapad. Not much. They're silicon-based life forms with crystalline exoskeletons. They value combat experience above all other traits and have a quasi-religious belief that defeating an enemy's best warriors in ritual combat gives them the right to absorb their knowledge. Absorb how? Asked Jiangguo, looking concerned. Are we talking metaphorically or literally? Because I've had enough people in my head over the years. Unknown, Eliza admitted. All we know is that in every system they've conquered, they've demanded to face the most experienced warriors. In most cases, the species complied, lost, and were subsequently conquered with minimal resistance. And in the cases where species didn't comply? Asked Naveen Gupta, a former combat engineer whose artificial eyes glowed faintly blue in the dim light of the shuttle. Total annihilation, Eliza said grimly. They glassed the planets from orbit. Charming, muttered Ava Jurgensen, a Norwegian woman whose silver hair was still worn in the same tight braid she'd favored during her active duty days. And what exactly are the rules of engagement for this ritual combat? Each side selects 8 champions. The battlefield is a 2-kilometer circular arena. Last side with at least 1 champion standing wins. Weapons? Asked Kurt. Personal weapons only, no vehicles, no orbital support, no reinforcements. Nikolai grinned, revealing several replacement teeth. I like these odds. Zoe raised a skeptical eyebrow. You're joking. Not at all, the big Russian replied. 8 against 8, personal weapons? When was the last time we faced an enemy stupid enough to meet us on equal terms? We were considerably younger then, Dio pointed out. And considerably less experienced, countered Olivia. Besides, silicon-based life forms with crystalline exoskeletons? Has anyone else made the obvious connection? The other 7 veterans looked at each other, slow smiles spreading across their weathered faces. Glass breaks, said Jiangguo. And we've always been good at breaking things, added Kurt. Captain Hayes looked from one elderly face to another, mystified by their sudden confidence. I'm missing something here. Captain, said Zoe gently. How much do you know about the Voidwalkers? Only rumors. You were active during the Proxima Rebellion, supposedly turned the tide of the war, but most of the mission files are still classified, even 60 years later. There's a reason for that, said Naveen. Let's just say we specialized in doing the impossible, usually against enemies who had significant technological advantages. And what was your success rate? Eliza asked skeptically. We're alive, Eva said simply. Our enemies aren't. The shuttle's automated system announced their impending landing, and the conversation ceased as each veteran began their final equipment checks. Eliza watched in growing amazement as the seemingly frail elderly transformed before her eyes. Their movements, while still showing the effects of age, took on an efficiency and purpose that belied their years. Even more surprisingly, Each of them produced weapons and equipment that had definitely not been issued for this mission. "Where did you get those?" she demanded, as Nikolai attached what appeared to be a modified mining charge to his belt. "I never returned my equipment," he said with a shrug. "None of us did. These weapons are museum pieces." "No," corrected Dio, lovingly patting a wicked-looking rifle with numerous aftermarket modifications. "These weapons are reliable. There's a difference." The landing zone was a flat plain several kilometers from the colony's main settlement. As the shuttle touched down, Eliza's comm unit buzzed with an incoming transmission from the Vexari. "The ritual area has been prepared according to the agreed parameters," came a voice that sounded like breaking glass being run through a synthesizer. "Your champions will proceed to the northern entrance. Ours will enter from the south. Combat commences when all 16 have crossed their respective thresholds." "Understood," Eliza replied, then turned to the veterans. "This is your last chance to back out. No one would blame you." Kurt snorted. "And miss a chance to do something interesting before I die? Not likely. Besides," added Zoe, "what's the alternative? Let these crystalline bastards vaporize the colony? I've got a great-great-granddaughter living here. She sends me cookies." "Are they good cookies?" asked Nikolai. "Terrible. But she's 7, so I forgive her." Captain Hayes watched in disbelief as the 8 elderly veterans, the oldest being 86, the youngest a sprightly 72, gathered their gear and prepared to disembark. Their combined age was over 600 years, yet they moved with the cohesion of a unit that had fought together yesterday, not 6 decades ago. "Captain," Jiang Guo said quietly, "if we don't return, there's a data chip in my quarters at the facility. The access code is my wife's birthday. Make sure Fleet Command gets it." Before Eliza could ask what was on the chip, the shuttle door opened, revealing the alien landscape of Nexus 7. Despite being colonized for nearly 30 years, the planet still retained much of its original vegetation, purple-hued ferns and orange grass-like structures that swayed in the breeze. In the distance, a massive circular structure had been erected, presumably the combat arena. It resembled a Roman Colosseum, if Romans had built with some kind of iridescent crystal instead of stone. "Gaudy," commented Olivia. "Reminds me of that casino on Europa where Naveen lost 3 months' pay in one night." "I was card counting," Naveen defended himself. They were using quantum shufflers. As the veterans began the walk toward the arena, Eliza fell into step beside Zoe, who, despite her age, moved with remarkable grace. "Why did you agree to this?" Eliza asked quietly. Zoe's weathered face creased in a small smile. "Have you ever been utterly, completely bored, Captain?" "I suppose not." "We have. For decades. Do you know what they do with old Special Forces operatives who know too many secrets to be allowed to fully integrate back into society?" "I assumed you retired." Zoe laughed, a surprisingly youthful sound. "That's the official story." "The reality is we've been kept together, watched over, given enough comfort to keep us complacent, but enough restriction to keep us contained. The Golden Years facility isn't just a retirement home, it's a gilded cage." Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. "You're saying you've been prisoners?" "Honored guests with limited visiting privileges," corrected Zoe. "We understood the necessity. We've seen things, done things, that would terrify the average citizen. Still, we've been allowed occasional sanctioned missions over the decades when our particular expertise was needed." "Like what?" "Like the reason silicon-based life forms worry us so little," Zoe replied enigmatically. From a viewing platform high above the arena, Tskal Ven and his command staff watched the approaching humans with all their eyes. "They are elderly?" Mevkin's confusion caused his crystalline form to pulse with discolored light. "Is this some form of insult?" Tskal Ven's own form remained steady, though his primary eye narrowed. "Perhaps. Or perhaps this is their strategy. The ritual demands their most experienced warriors, not their strongest or youngest. But they can barely move without assistance. One appears to be using a mobility aid." Indeed, one of the humans, Kurt, was now walking with a pronounced limp, leaning heavily on a metal cane. "Do not underestimate them," Tskal Ven cautioned. "Humans are known for their deception tactics. Scan them." A subordinate manipulated a series of crystal controls, activating the arena's sophisticated sensor array. After a moment, he reported, "Life signs consistent with advanced age. Numerous artificial replacements and medical implants detected. Minimal armor. Various projectile and energy weapons, all outdated models." "And our champions?" asked Tskal Ven. "Peak physical condition. Latest combat enhancements. Superior weaponry. Then we have nothing to fear, declared Mevkin. This will be over quickly. Tiskalven's outer membrane rippled uncertainly. Perhaps too quickly. Remember the seventh maxim of victory. When prey surrenders too easily, suspect a trap, completed Mevkin. But what trap could these decrepit creatures possibly set? We shall see, said Skalven, and then we shall know. As the humans approached the northern entrance to the arena, a massive archway carved from a single crystal, they paused for a final conference. Standard formation? Asked Dio. With modifications, replied Zoe. Nikolai and Eva on front corners. Kurt, you're with me in center rear. Your leg making you a target works to our advantage. Naveen, maintain position in the absolute center. Olivia, Dio, and Jiangguo, mobile reserve. Just like Proxima Centauri, said Kurt with a nostalgic smile. Just like Proxima Centauri, agreed Zoe. Except we're 60 years older and facing silicon-based life forms instead of human separatists. The silicon part is an advantage, noted Jiangguo. Remember Titan? How could I forget, said Naveen. I still have nightmares about those mining constructs. Eliza, who had accompanied them to the entrance but would watch from a designated observation area, finally asked the question that had been bothering her. What happened on Titan? The veterans exchanged glances. That's still classified, technically, said Olivia. But since we'll probably be dead soon, added Kurt cheerfully, I don't see the harm. We encountered a rogue AI that had taken control of the mining operations. It had built itself an army of crystal silicon hybrid constructs, nearly indestructible to conventional weapons. So how did you defeat them? Eliza asked. Nikolai grinned broadly. Frequency. Everything has a resonant frequency, explained Naveen. Find it, and you can shatter even the strongest materials with relatively little energy input. You're saying you can make these Vexari explode? With sound? Not exactly, said Zoe. But we can make their crystalline structures highly vulnerable to conventional attacks. It's why we brought these specific weapons. She patted her ancient-looking sidearm, which Eliza now noticed had been modified with what appeared to be a sonic emitter. We need to go, said Eva, checking a timepiece on her wrist. The ritual commences in 2 minutes. With nods to Captain Hayes, the 8 veterans stepped through the crystal archway and into the arena beyond. The interior of the arena was surprisingly austere, a flat circular expanse covered in fine purple-orange sand, with high walls of translucent crystal that allowed observers to see inside but prevented combatants from escaping. There were no obstacles, no cover, just open ground between the northern and southern entrances. Standing at the southern entrance were 8 Vexari warriors. Each stood nearly 2.5 meters tall, their bodies resembling humanoid figures sculpted from living glass. They glinted in the sunlight, refracting it into dazzling patterns across the arena floor. Their weapons appeared to be crystalline growths extending from their arms. Some formed into blades, others into what looked like projectors of some kind. Pretty, commented Olivia dryly. I do hope they don't shatter too easily. I was looking forward to a challenge. Don't get cocky, warned Zoe. Remember, we need at least one of us standing at the end. A resonant tone sounded throughout the arena, signaling the commencement of combat. The Vexari immediately fanned out in a precise formation, moving with liquid grace despite their apparently solid forms. They're fast, noted Dio, raising his weapon. But predictable, replied Kurt. Classic pincer movement. They're treating this like a conventional engagement. The Vexari, seeing the seemingly disorganized and slow-moving humans, accelerated their advance. Not yet, murmured Zoe as Nikolai raised his weapon. Let them commit. The lead Vexari warrior, a particularly large specimen with a body that pulsed with blue-green light, raised its arm weapon and fired. A shard of crystal rocketed toward Eva, who simply took one step to the side. The projectile buried itself in the sand where she had been standing. Kinetic crystal weapons, observed Jiangguo. Fascinating. They're literally shooting pieces of themselves. Now, asked Nikolai, his massive frame tensed. Now, confirmed Zoe. What happened next would later be described by Captain Hayes as 8 geriatric humans turning into the scariest fighters I've ever seen. Despite their age, despite their physical limitations, each veteran moved with perfect coordination. Nikolai and Eva dropped to the ground, revealing Naveen in the center, who had assembled what looked like a crude sonic amplifier. He activated it, sending a focused wave of sound directly at the advancing Vexari. The effect wasn't immediately visible, but the aliens suddenly slowed, their movements becoming less fluid. Phase 1 complete, called Naveen. Their crystalline structure is destabilized. You have approximately 45 seconds. Kurt, who had been leaning heavily on his cane, suddenly straightened up and twisted the handle. The cane separated, revealing that it was actually a disguised energy weapon of a design Eliza had never seen before. He fired at the nearest Vexari, and where the beam struck, the alien's body cracked like glass struck by a hammer. The Vexari, realizing something was wrong, attempted to regroup, but they moved sluggishly, as though their joints had suddenly become brittle. "Advance pattern Theta," ordered Zoe, and the elderly humans, who seconds before had appeared barely able to walk across the arena, moved with startling coordination. Dio and Olivia circled wide to the flanks, their modified weapons firing concentrated bursts that caused the Vexari's crystalline bodies to fracture where hit. Jianguo stayed back, providing covering fire with remarkable accuracy for a man who supposedly needed strong prescription glasses. Nikolai charged straight ahead, closing the distance to the lead Vexari warrior. The alien attempted to impale him with a crystalline blade, but the old Russian caught the arm, which would have been a fatal mistake under normal circumstances. However, with the Vexari structure destabilized by Naveen's sonic device, the arm cracked under Nikolai's grip. "In Russia," he growled as he drove a vibrating punch into the alien's midsection, "we drink vodka stronger than you." The Vexari shattered into thousands of crystalline fragments. In the observation platform, Tskal Ven watched in horror as his warriors literally fell to pieces before the elderly humans. "Impossible!" screeched Mevkin. "They've weaponized sonic frequencies calibrated to our structural resonance." "How could they know?" demanded Tskal Ven. "We've never encountered humans before." "Unknown. But they clearly understand our physiological weaknesses. Our warriors are being systematically destroyed." Down in the arena, a second Vexari champion shattered under Eva's precise attack. She had modified her gloves to emit the same resonant frequency as Naveen's device, allowing her to deliver devastating blows directly. A third Vexari attempted to retreat, only to be intercepted by Kurt, whose seemingly injured leg had been a complete ruse. His energy weapon fired again, and the alien collapsed into glittering dust. "Stop the ritual!" ordered Skalven, his entire form pulsing with alarmed colors. "This is not combat, this is extermination." "We cannot," replied his subordinate. "By our own laws, the ritual cannot be interrupted once begun. To do so would be to forfeit not just our claim to this territory, but our honor as warriors." Tiskalven's primary eye widened as another of his warriors shattered. What kind of species sends their elderly as their champions, yet equips them with weapons specifically designed to exploit our exact weaknesses? "A species that has encountered silicon-based life forms before," replied Mevkin grimly. "A species that prepares for all contingencies. A species more dangerous than we estimated." Back in the arena, the remaining Vexari warriors had abandoned their offensive, instead trying to maintain distance from the advancing humans. "They're retreating," observed Dio. "Should we pursue?" "Carefully," advised Zoe. "They may be planning a counterattack." Indeed, the 4 remaining Vexari had formed a tight defensive square, their bodies resonating at changing frequencies to try to counteract the sonic disruptions. "They're adapting," warned Naveen, adjusting his device. "I can't maintain the destabilization effect much longer." "Then we finish this now," said Zoe. She reached into a pouch and removed what appeared to be a handful of small metal spheres. "Resonance grenades, everyone. Pattern Sigma. The veterans each took a sphere, immediately understanding the plan without further explanation. They spread out in a semicircle around the defensive Vexari position. "On my mark," said Zoe. 3, 2, 1. Mark! 8 metal spheres arced through the air, landing in a precise pattern around the Vexari. A moment later, they activated, each emitting a slightly different frequency that, when combined, created a destructive resonance pattern impossible to adapt to. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Vexari warriors literally came apart, their crystalline bodies disintegrating from the inside out. In seconds, where 4 formidable alien warriors had stood, there was nothing but piles of glittering dust. A profound silence fell over the arena. "Well," said Kurt after a moment, "that was anticlimactic." "I think I pulled something in my back," complained Nikolai, rubbing his lower spine. "I told you not to try that spin move," Olivia chided him. "You're not 25 anymore." "Are we actually all still alive?" asked Jianguo, sounding genuinely surprised. I had prepared quite a nice final speech. "Save it for next time," said Eva, already collecting samples of the crystalline remains in a small container. "For further analysis," she explained when Dio gave her a questioning look. Each silicon-based life form has a slightly different resonant frequency. This will help us refine our approach. Zoe surveyed the arena, making sure there were no surprises left, then activated her comm unit. Captain Hayes, the ritual is complete. We've achieved victory with 0 casualties on our side and complete elimination of the enemy force. Eliza's voice came back, tinged with awe. I saw. The Vexari commander is requesting communication with your team leader. He says it's about the terms of their withdrawal. Zoe smiled thinly. Tell him I'll be right up. In the observation platform, Skalven had composed himself as much as possible, though his crystalline form still occasionally pulsed with disturbed colors. When Zoe entered, accompanied by Captain Hayes, the Vexari commander forced his outer membrane to maintain a steady hue, a sign of respect among his kind. You are the leader of these champions? He asked, his synthesized voice carefully modulated. I am, replied Zoe simply. Your combat technique was unexpected. You have encountered silicon-based life forms before. It wasn't a question, but Zoe answered anyway. Yes, the incident is not in your intelligence records because we made sure there were no survivors to report back. A shiver ran through Skalven's form. I see. And these others, they are truly your most experienced warriors? Not some deception. They are exactly what they appear to be. Veterans of countless conflicts, with over 5 centuries of combined combat experience. What they lack in physical prime, they more than make up for in knowledge and adaptation. Fascinating, said the Vexari commander. According to our ritual customs, we are now obligated to withdraw from this territory and acknowledge humanity's right to it. Additionally, he hesitated. The victors typically claim knowledge from the defeated. What kind of knowledge? Asked Eliza cautiously. Technical specifications, tactical databases, cultural information. The spoils of victory. And Zoe considered for a moment. We will accept your tactical databases and information on all species you've encountered. In return, we will not pursue your fleet as it leaves this sector. You are merciful? Noted Skalven, sounding surprised. No, corrected Zoe. I'm practical. Pursuing you would cost lives on both sides. This way you learn humans are not to be trifled with, and we gain valuable intelligence about potential allies or threats. Skalven's primary eye focused intensely on the elderly human woman. You did not come seeking our destruction. We never do, said Zoe, but we're very, very good at it when forced. The return journey to Earth was considerably more relaxed than the outbound trip had been. The 8 veterans lounged in the transport shuttle, swapping stories and complaints about various aches and pains. I still can't believe none of us died, said Kurt, now genuinely leaning on his cane. I had 20 credits riding on me being the first to go. You wish, scoffed Olivia. You're too stubborn to die in combat. You'll probably slip in the shower at the facility and break your other hip. Speaking of the facility, said Eliza, who had been quietly processing everything she'd witnessed. I've received new orders regarding your accommodations. The veterans fell silent, their expressions guarded. Oh? Said Zoe carefully. And what might those be? Admiral Kohler was extremely impressed by your performance. He's authorized a complete revision of your status. The Golden Years facility will remain your residence, but all restrictions on movement and visitors have been lifted. Additionally, you're being formally reinstated as consultants to Fleet Special Operations. Consultants? Repeated Daya with a raised eyebrow. At our age? Your experience just saved an entire colony without firing more than a dozen shots, Eliza pointed out. The Admiral thinks there might be other situations where your unique perspective could be valuable. Does this mean I can finally visit my great-granddaughter's ballet recital? Asked Nikolai hopefully. It means you can go wherever you want, whenever you want, confirmed Eliza. Within reason, of course. Define within reason, said Kurt suspiciously. No starting interstellar incidents, no unsanctioned combat operations, no stealing military equipment, though you'll be issued updated versions of your specialized gear. Spoil sport, muttered Olivia, but she was smiling. Zoe had been quiet, watching Captain Hayes with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see everything. And what about you, Captain? I imagine this experience has been somewhat eye-opening. Eliza nodded slowly. That's one way to put it. I've been assigned as your new liaison officer. Poor you, said Zhangguo sympathetically. Actually, said Eliza, I requested the assignment, and this earned her surprised looks from all 8 veterans. Why would you do that? Asked Eva. We're not exactly easy to work with. Because in one day, I learned more about actual combat tactics than in 4 years at the PAO Academy, replied Eliza honestly. And because someone needs to make sure you don't accidentally start a war the next time you get bored. She's smart, Nikolai said to Zoe. I like her. We'll see, replied Zoe, but there was approval in her eyes. First rule of working with us, Captain Hayes. Never underestimate old soldiers. We didn't get this way by being easy to kill. I think I've thoroughly learned that lesson, said Eliza wryly. Though I'm still not clear on what exactly happened on Titan. The 8 veterans exchanged glances again, this time with small smiles. Well, said Kurt, settling back in his seat. It all started when we were sent to investigate a communications blackout at the mining colony. As the transport shuttle continued its journey back to Earth, Captain Hayes listened in growing amazement to the true, unclassified story of the Voidwalkers and the Silicon Wars that history had nearly forgotten, but that the Vexari and their allies would remember for generations to come. In the vastness of space, word was already spreading among silicon-based species. Beware the humans, especially the old ones. They may move slowly, but they know exactly how to make you shatter. At the next meeting of the Galactic Council, a new advisory was issued to all member species. Approach human space with caution. Their elders are not what they seem. A Vexari representative, newly admitted as an observer, simply pulsed in agreement, their crystalline form carefully maintained at maximum molecular stability. Just in case. 6 months later, the grounds of the Golden Years Veteran Residential Facility had changed considerably. What had once been a sterile, institutional complex designed primarily for containment now featured extensive gardens, an outdoor combat training area, and a landing pad where various shuttles and transport craft came and went regularly. In one of the newly renovated conference rooms, Captain Eliza Hayes stood before a holographic display, briefing the 8 Voidwalkers on their next assignment. The Draconis hegemony has established a blockade around the Epsilon Eridani system, she explained, highlighting a cluster of red dots representing alien warships. They're demanding access to the ancient ruins on the 4th planet. Draconis, mused Olivia, sipping tea from an antique porcelain. Cup. Methane breathers, if I recall correctly. Scaly bastards with superiority complexes. Your recollection is accurate, confirmed Eliza. They've been a minor nuisance for decades, but this is their first direct confrontation with a human-controlled system. Why now? Asked Zoe, studying the tactical display with narrowed eyes. The ruins at Epsilon Eridani have been under human protection for over 40 years. Intelligence suggests they may have obtained information about the ruins' contents from the Vexari databases, replied Eliza. Before your encounter forced their withdrawal, Kurt snorted. So basically this is our fault. I prefer to think of it as an unintended consequence, Eliza said diplomatically. Naveen, who had been tinkering with a complex-looking device on the conference table, looked up. What exactly do these lizards think is in the ruins? According to our xenoarchaeologists, nothing of significant military value, said Eliza. Cultural artifacts, historical records of the precursor civilization. Scientifically fascinating, but hardly worth starting an interstellar conflict over. Unless they know something we don't, suggested Dio. Precisely, agreed Eliza. Which is why Fleet Command wants you to handle the situation. Nikolai, who had returned from visiting his family sporting a new beard style that his great-granddaughter had insisted looked cool, grinned broadly. They want us to kick some reptilian ass? At our age? The Admiral must be getting desperate. Actually, said Eliza, they want you to negotiate. 8 elderly faces registered varying degrees of surprise. Negotiate? Repeated Eva incredulously. We're soldiers, not diplomats. You're veterans with over 6 centuries of combined experience dealing with hostile species, corrected Eliza. And after the Vexari incident, your reputation has spread. The Draconis specifically requested the ancient human warriors for the talks. Well, that's not ominous at all, muttered Jiangguo. It could be a trap, suggested Kurt, always the pessimist. Almost certainly, agreed Zoe calmly. But traps work both ways. Captain, what parameters has Fleet Command established for these negotiations? Eliza's lips quirked in a small smile. Quite generous ones, actually. Your primary objective is to end the blockade without military confrontation. How you achieve that is left largely to your discretion. Translation: don't start a war, but feel free to terrify them into submission, interpreted Olivia with evident satisfaction. I didn't say that, Eliza replied. but her expression suggested she wasn't contradicting the assessment. Either. When do we leave? Asked Dio, already mentally cataloging what equipment he would need. Transport departs in 6 hours, said Eliza. I suggest you all get ready. As the meeting broke up, Zoe remained behind, studying the tactical display thoughtfully. Something on your mind, Commander? Asked Eliza, who had quickly learned that Zoe's instincts were worth paying attention to. The Draconis aren't fools, said Zoe slowly. They must know their blockade can't stand against a determined fleet response. So why the theatrics? Why specifically request us? Perhaps your reputation precedes you. Perhaps. Or perhaps they want something else entirely. Zoe's weathered face creased in a small, dangerous smile. Well, we'll find out soon enough. The Draconis flagship Eternal Dominion bristled with weaponry designed to look intimidating. All sharp angles and protruding barrels, its hull painted in aggressive patterns of red and black. It hung in space at the center of the blockade formation, surrounded by 12 smaller vessels arranged in a defensive pattern that any competent tactician would recognize as more ceremonial than practical. Inside the flagship's ornate reception chamber, Supreme Commander Vexkala paced impatiently, her scaled tail lashing back and forth across the polished floor. Standing at a respectful distance, her senior officers watched with varying degrees of unease. "The humans have accepted our terms?" she demanded of her communications officer. "Yes, Supreme Commander," replied the officer, his scales shifting to a submissive blue-gray. "They are sending the warriors who defeated the Vexari, as requested. Their transport will arrive within the hour." "Excellent," hissed Vexkala, her own scales flushing a confident orange. "And our special preparations?" Her weapons officer straightened to attention. "Complete, Supreme Commander. The reception chamber has been adjusted to Earth-normal atmosphere and gravity, but with the modifications you specified." "Good. The humans believe this to be a diplomatic meeting. They will not be expecting our hospitality." She gestured to an elaborate arrangement of ceremonial weapons displayed on one wall. "The Ancient Ones will soon learn that the Draconis hegemony is not as easily intimidated as the Silicon folk." Her second-in-command, a battle-scarred veteran named Drexthal, cleared his throat cautiously. "Supreme Commander, if I may speak freely?" "Proceed," she permitted with a dismissive flick of her clawed hand. "These humans defeated the Vexari champions in under 10 minutes. Perhaps we should reconsider." "The Vexari are weak," interrupted Vexkala scornfully. "Their crystalline bodies may be aesthetically pleasing, but they lack the evolutionary perfection of the Draconis. We are the apex predators of 3-star systems. These humans, especially the elderly ones, are soft, warm-blooded mammals with brittle bones and failing organs." "As you say, Supreme Commander," replied Drexthal, his scales rippling in a pattern that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "Alert me when their transport approaches," ordered Vexkala. "I wish to observe their arrival personally." As her officers departed to carry out her instructions, the Supreme Commander moved to a large viewport that offered a panoramic view of the blockade. Beyond it, the blue-green world of Epsilon Eridani IV hung in space, its surface partly obscured by swirling clouds. Somewhere on that planet were the ruins that, according to the Vexari records, contained the key to precursor technology that could elevate the Draconis from regional power to galactic empire. And all that stood in her way were a few old humans. "Well, this looks welcoming," remarked Kurt as their transport approached the Draconis flagship. "I count at least 30 weapons emplacements, all powered up and tracking us." "Standard intimidation tactic," observed Eva from the co-pilot's seat. Despite not officially being certified on this class of vessel, she had taken over flight duties, citing the pilot's unnecessary tendency to follow regulations. "Are they actually targeting us?" asked Eliza, who still wasn't entirely comfortable with the veteran's casual attitude toward potential death. Naveen, who had been monitoring the sensor readouts, shook his head. "Tracking only. If they were serious about shooting us down, they wouldn't be so obvious about it." "Unless that's what they want us to think," suggested Olivia. "You've become more paranoid with age," Dio told her with a small smile. "It's not paranoia if everyone really is trying to kill you," replied Olivia primly. "And may I remind you of the Centauri Diplomatic Conference of 48? "That was different," protested Dio. "How was I supposed to know their ceremonial greeting involved live ammunition?" "Children," chided Zoe mildly. "Let's focus on the present situation. Jiangguo, have you finished analyzing the Draconis communications protocols?" The elderly Chinese man looked up from a portable terminal where he'd been working since they departed. Earth. Yes, their encryption is quaint. I've established a backdoor into their internal systems that should give us access to their communications network if needed. Eliza still found it remarkable how these supposedly retired veterans maintain such cutting-edge technical skills. Isn't that a violation of diplomatic protocol? Probably, admitted Jiang Guo without a hint of concern. But so is planning an ambush for diplomatic envoys, which is what they're doing. You're certain? Asked Eliza, alarmed. The atmospheric composition in their reception chamber has been altered, confirmed Jiang Guo. Oxygen levels increased to 28%, temperature raised to 32 degrees, and they've introduced trace amounts of a compound I don't recognize. Corlax gas, supplied Nikolai grimly. Harmless to reptilian species, but causes rapid muscle weakness in mammals. They used it against the Centauri colonies during the border disputes. How do you know that? Demanded Eliza. That information isn't in any fleet database I've accessed. Because we were there, said Zoe simply. Unofficial capacity. The incident was kept quiet to avoid escalation. Of course it was, muttered Eliza, not for the first time wondering just how many incidents these 8 had been involved in over their long careers. So they're planning to incapacitate us and… What? Asked Kurt. Take us hostage? Seems risky given what happened to the Vexari. Information, suggested Eva. They want to know how we defeated the Silicon folk so easily. Military intelligence. Or they simply want to eliminate a perceived threat, offered Dio. Our reputation may have made us targets. Whatever their plan, said Zoe decisively, we proceed as arranged, but we'll take precautions. From compartments beneath their seats, each veteran produced what looked like standard-issue diplomatic protection gear. Thin body armor designed to be worn under formal attire, small defensive shields disguised as accessories, and innocuous-looking personal items that Eliza strongly suspected were weapons in disguise. Captain, said Zoe, offering her a small silver pin. You might want to wear this. What is it? Asked Eliza, examining the fleet insignia that looked perfectly regulation. Atmospheric filter, replied Zoe. It'll counteract the Corlax gas. Also functions as an emergency beacon and short-range communication device. Where did you get these? Eliza asked, genuinely curious. They're not standard issue. Let's just say that when you've served as long as we have, you accumulate resources, said Olivia with a mysterious smile. A chime from the communication system interrupted further questions. A harsh reptilian voice announced, Human transport. You are cleared for docking in Bay 3. Prepare to receive boarding instructions. Shall I comply? Asked Eva, her hand hovering over the controls. Zoe nodded. Let's not give them any reason to suspect we're onto their little game. Not yet, anyway. As the transport adjusted course toward the indicated docking bay, Eliza observed the veterans with new eyes. Gone was any sign of age or infirmity. Instead, she saw what their enemies must have seen throughout the decades. Focused, capable warriors preparing for battle, regardless of the form that battle might take. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She asked Zoe quietly. The older woman's eyes twinkled with surprising youthfulness. Captain, when you reach my age, you learn to savor the moments when you're truly alive. And nothing makes you feel more alive than outsmarting someone who's trying to kill you. Approaching docking bay, announced Eva, interrupting the moment. Preparing for lock-on. As the transport systems engaged with the Draconis docking mechanisms, Nikolai cracked his massive knuckles and grinned broadly. So, we're walking into an obvious trap to negotiate with hostile reptiles who are planning to drug and possibly kill us. Just like old times. Just like old times, agreed Kurt with a matching grin. Only now we have arthritis. The reception chamber of the Eternal Dominion lived up to its species' reputation for ostentation. Massive pillars carved to resemble stylized warriors supported a vaulted ceiling decorated with scenes of Draconis military victories. The walls were hung with weapons and battle standards, while the floor was a mosaic depicting a reptilian foot crushing what appeared to be various mammalian species. Subtle, commented Olivia, as they were escorted into the chamber by a contingent of heavily armed Draconis guards. Supreme Commander Vex Kala awaited them on an elevated platform, seated on what could only be described as a throne. Her scales shimmered with iridescent patterns that signal readers would recognize as expressing confidence bordering on arrogance. The honored human warriors, she announced. her translator rendering her sibilant speech into slightly stilted English. "We welcome you aboard the flagship of the Draconis. Hegemony." The 8 veterans plus Captain Hayes arranged themselves in the center of the chamber, deliberately positioning themselves in what appeared to be a disorganized cluster but was actually a carefully planned formation that gave each of them overlapping fields of view. "Supreme Commander," replied Zoe, stepping forward slightly, "we come on behalf of the Earth Fleet to resolve the current misunderstanding regarding Epsilon Eridani 4. Vexkala's inner eyelids flickered, a sign of amusement. "Misunderstanding? There is no misunderstanding. The hegemony has claimed the precursor ruins by right of historical connection. Our species were favored by the precursors. The artifacts rightfully belong to us." "Interesting claim," said Zoe mildly, "especially since the ruins were discovered by human archaeologists 43 years ago, and no evidence of Draconis involvement with the precursor civilization has ever been documented." The Supreme Commander's scales rippled with irritation. "The evidence exists in our own historical records. Records we are not obligated to share with mammals." Throughout this exchange, Eliza noticed the veterans subtly scanning the room, identifying exits, assessing the armed guards, and occasionally exchanging meaningful glances. They were also, she realized, deliberately prolonging the conversation, and breathing as shallowly as possible despite the atmospheric filters. "Perhaps," suggested Zoe reasonably, "a compromise could be reached. Joint access to the ruins, shared research." "There will be no compromise," interrupted Vexkala. "The hegemony does not share. Your species will withdraw from this system or face the consequences." "I see," said Zoe, her tone still pleasantly diplomatic. "And what might those consequences be?" The Supreme Commander's mouth stretched in what a human might mistake for a smile but was actually a threat display. "I believe you are already experiencing them. The atmosphere in this chamber has been specially prepared for our meeting. By now you should be feeling the effects of—" She stopped abruptly, clearly expecting to see the humans swaying or collapsing. Instead, all 9 stood perfectly steady, appearing completely unaffected. "The effects of what, Commander?" prompted Zoe innocently. "Your hospitality? Yes, it's quite overwhelming." Vexkala's scales flushed a deep red. Anger, confusion. "Impossible! The Korlax concentration should have incapacitated mammals?" finished Jiangguo helpfully. "Yes, typically it would. However, we took the liberty of counteracting it before we arrived. Professional courtesy. We thought you'd prefer to negotiate with us fully. Conscious." The Draconis guards shifted uneasily, their weapons raising slightly. Around the chamber, other reptilian officials exchanged alarmed glances. Only Drex Thal, the second in command, maintained his composure, watching the elderly humans with newfound respect. "You knew," hissed Vexkala, rising from her throne. "You knew and came anyway." "Of course we knew," replied Zoe calmly. "Just as we know about your real interest in the ruins. The weapon schematics you believe are hidden there." That struck home. The Supreme Commander's scales paled visibly. "You see," continued Zoe, "the problem with obtaining intelligence from the Vexari is that they only had part of the story. Yes, the ruins contain precursor technology, but it's not weaponry. It's a failsafe." "Explain," demanded Vexkala, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "The precursors didn't die out or leave," explained Zoe. "They evolved. Some theories suggest they became energy beings. Others suggest they transcended this dimensional plane entirely. But before they did, they left behind safeguards, systems designed to prevent any single species from using their technology to dominate others." "Lies," spat the Supreme Commander. "Human deception." "Perhaps," acknowledged Zoe with a small shrug. "But consider this. In 43 years of study, why haven't humans weaponized anything from those ruins? We're quite good at turning things into weapons, as the Vexari learned." This gave the Draconis leader pause. Her inner eyelids flickered rapidly as she processed this information. "What we propose," continued Zoe, "is genuine cooperation. The ruins contain knowledge that could benefit all spacefaring species. Medical advancements, sustainable energy production, faster-than-light travel improvements. But accessed improperly, that same technology becomes problematic." "What do you mean, problematic?" asked Drexthal, speaking for the first time. Nikolai answered this one. "The last species that tried to extract weapons technology from a precursor site was the Xanthi Collective. Heard of them?" The Draconis officers exchanged glances. "No," admitted Drexthal. "We have not. Exactly, said Nikolai grimly. Neither has anyone else. Their home system is now an expanding nebula of superheated gas. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Whether the veterans were telling the truth or executing a masterful bluff was impossible for the Draconis to determine, which was precisely the point. Supreme Commander Vex Kala slowly sank back onto her throne, her aggressive posture diminishing. Slightly. These safeguards, they can differentiate between peaceful use and military application? They respond to intent, confirmed Zoe, which is why cooperative research, with multiple species providing oversight, is the only safe approach. For several tense moments, the Supreme Commander considered. Then, to everyone's surprise, she began to laugh, a wheezing, hissing sound that made several of the human delegation instinctively reach for weapons they weren't officially carrying. Magnificent, she finally said. Truly magnificent. You come aboard my flagship, knowing we plan to incapacitate you. You neutralize our advantage without firing a shot. And now you offer us partnership instead of threatening retaliation. The benefits of experience, replied Zoe simply. Yes, agreed Vex Kala, studying the elderly humans with new interest. Experience, the one resource the hegemony truly respects. She rose again, but this time without the aggressive display. I withdraw the blockade. The Draconis hegemony will accept your proposal of joint research, with conditions to be negotiated, of course. Of course, agreed Zoe. But, continued the Supreme Commander, her scales shifting to a pattern that signal readers would interpret as calculating. I have one personal request. And that is? Vex Kala gestured toward one wall where an elaborate display of ceremonial weapons hung. Our tradition dictates that respected adversaries exchange knowledge of combat techniques. I would consider it a personal honor if you would demonstrate how 8 elderly mammals defeated the Vexari elite. The veterans exchanged glances, a silent conversation occurring in micro-expressions and subtle gestures that even Eliza, who had worked with them for months now, couldn't fully interpret. Finally, Kurt stepped forward, his ever-present cane tapping on the mosaic floor. It would be our pleasure, Supreme Commander. In fact, why don't we make it interactive? A friendly demonstration with your finest warriors. Vex Kala's scales rippled with delight. Excellent. Drexthal, assemble the elite guard. As the Draconis second-in-command hurried to comply, Eliza moved closer to Zoe. Are you sure this is wise? She murmured. They could use this as an excuse to restart hostilities. On the contrary, replied Zoe quietly. This is the perfect opportunity to ensure they never consider hostilities again. By defeating their elite guard, isn't that likely to provoke them further? Zoe's weathered face creased in a small smile. Who said anything about defeating? Them? Sometimes, Captain, the best way to win a war is to make your enemy into an ally. Before Eliza could ask what she meant, the chamber's large doors opened to admit 8 Draconis warriors, each bearing ceremonial armor and blunted training weapons. Our finest, announced Vex Kala proudly. Veterans of numerous campaigns, each with at least a century of combat experience. Impressive, acknowledged Zoe. Shall we begin? What followed was not, as Eliza had feared, a humiliating demonstration of the veterans' combat prowess. Instead, it became something far more subtle and, she realized, far more effective. The 8 elderly humans did not overwhelm or outfight the Draconis warriors. Instead, they engaged in what could only be described as a masterclass in combat psychology. They demonstrated techniques not of superior strength or speed, but of anticipation, positioning, and tactical awareness. They showed how to turn an opponent's advantage into a vulnerability, how to conserve energy in prolonged engagements, how to recognize and exploit patterns in hostile behavior, and most importantly, they shared rather than dominated. By the end of the demonstration, the Draconis warriors were eagerly exchanging techniques with the veterans, scales rippling with excitement as they absorbed centuries of accumulated human combat wisdom. From her throne, Supreme Commander Vex Kala watched with growing appreciation. Now I understand, she said quietly to Eliza, who had ended up standing near the dais. Your elders didn't simply defeat the Vexari through superior weaponry or tactics. No, agreed Eliza, finally understanding herself. They won because they've spent lifetimes learning when to fight and when not to. The most dangerous weapon humans possess isn't our technology or even our adaptability. It's your perspective, concluded Vex Kala. The long view that only comes with age and experience. Her scales shifted to a pattern Eliza didn't recognize. My species lives 3 times longer than yours, Captain. Our elders are respected, but they rarely leave their enclaves. Perhaps that has been our mistake. By the time the demonstration concluded, the atmosphere in the chamber had transformed from hostile tension to something approaching mutual respect. The Draconis warriors were comparing notes with the veterans, while various officers clustered around, asking questions and occasionally attempting to replicate specific techniques. I believe our diplomatic mission has been successful, Zoe informed Eliza as they prepared to depart. The blockade will be lifted, and we've established the framework for scientific cooperation without a single shot fired. You never intended to fight them, realized Eliza. From the moment we arrived, your plan was to convert them from adversaries to allies. Fighting is easy, Captain, replied Zoe. Any idiot can pull a trigger. Making peace with those who want to kill you, that takes real skill. And experience, added Eliza. Exactly. Zoe glanced around at her fellow veterans, who were now teaching the Draconis guards a particularly effective disarmament technique. That's the true value of old soldiers. Not that we know how to win wars, but that we know how to prevent them. 2 weeks later, in the gardens of the Golden Years facility, Admiral Kohler himself presented the veterans with commendations for their handling of the Draconis situation. Thanks to your efforts, he announced during the small private ceremony, we've established the first ever joint research protocol with the hegemony. Their scientists arrive at Epsilon Eridani next month. Try not to let them near anything explosive, advised Kurt, who was relaxing in a hovering medicinal chair, his recent hip replacement still healing. I've been authorized to inform you that this success has led to a formal change in fleet policy, continued the Admiral. We're establishing a new division, the Veteran Advisory Corps. Its purpose will be to utilize the experience of retired personnel in diplomatic and strategic operations. You're institutionalizing us? Asked Olivia, sounding amused. How dreadful. I'm offering you the chance to share your knowledge with the next generation, corrected Kohler. On your terms, with full autonomy and resources. And if we refuse? Asked Dio, always cautious. Then you continue exactly as you are, said the Admiral. Free to enjoy your retirement, with occasional consultations when we face particularly difficult situations. The 8 veterans exchanged glances, their silent communication as effective as ever. We'll consider it, said Zoe finally. But we have conditions. I expected nothing less, replied Kohler with a small smile. Captain Hayes will remain as your liaison, as requested. The facility upgrades you specified have been approved. And yes, before you ask, the restriction on experimental equipment has been lifted, provided you file the appropriate safety. Documentation. Bureaucracy, muttered Nikolai, but he was grinning. As the Admiral departed, the veterans returned to their previous activity, a seemingly innocent garden party that, Eliza knew, doubled as a strategy session for mentoring promising young officers from Fleet Academy. You planned this all along, didn't you? She asked Zoe as they watched Jiangguo demonstrating a complex encryption algorithm to a wide-eyed cadet. Planned what? The Vexari incident, the Draconis negotiations. They were opportunities for you to demonstrate your value, to secure your freedom and establish this new role. Zoe's eyes twinkled. That would require an extraordinary level of foresight and manipulation, Captain. Exactly what you excel at, countered Eliza. The elderly woman simply smiled and sipped her tea. Let's just say that when you've lived as long as we have, you learn to recognize patterns. The galaxy is changing. New species are emerging into space, old alliances are shifting, and humanity needs to adapt. And you think a bunch of geriatric veterans are the key to that adaptation? No, replied Zoe seriously. The key is understanding that strength isn't always about firepower or technology. Sometimes it's about perspective, about seeing the longer game. The Voidwalkers were effective because we never forgot that the goal isn't to win the battle, it's to secure the peace that follows. In the distance, a shuttle was landing on the newly constructed pad. Visitors from the Draconis hegemony, coming to continue the cultural exchange that had begun aboard their flagship. Old soldiers never die, Captain, said Zoe, watching as the reptilian forms disembarked. We just find new ways to serve. Around the garden, the other 7 veterans were already moving to welcome their former adversaries, each in their own way demonstrating that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its weapons or its technology or even its adaptability. It was its ability to turn today's enemies into tomorrow's allies, a lesson that could only be taught by those who had lived long enough to learn it themselves. As news of the Voidwalkers' diplomatic success spread throughout the galaxy, other species began to take notice. The Arcturians quietly withdrew their territorial claims along the Orion Spur. The collective mind of Tau Ceti sent diplomatic overtures for the first time in 30 years. Even the notoriously isolationist cloud dwellers of Barnard's Star requested consultation with the ancient humans. In the Galactic Council chambers, the advisory was updated once more. The old humans are not to be feared for their combat prowess, but for their ability to win without fighting. Approach with respect, leave with wisdom, or don't approach at all. The universe, it seemed, had finally learned what the veterans had known all along. In the vastness of space, survival depended not on being the strongest, but on being smart enough to know when strength wasn't the answer. And no one was better at that lesson than those who had lived long enough to learn it the hard way. The end.